Where do you think the world's tallest building will be in the year 2050, and why?
I think it will be in America, and I think the fact that the economic crisis will soon end will trigger a new rally for where the highest buildings would be, and I think America is probably at the forefront of the new push, and therefore I think in 2050 it could be in America.
So where the tall building boom began, in a sense, 100
Yes,
years ago.
I think that there is a kind of anxiety of the fact that it went away from America to Europe, to the Middle East, and to China, and maybe even Asia, that they now want it back.
Do you think it would come back to the same cities that bore it, the New York, Chicago?
It could also be the other side of the country.
In LA?
Probably LA, yeah.
Interesting. Will be interesting to see. What do tall building designers need to do to improve disaster resilience or climate resilience, make buildings more responsive, reactive?
I think it's not a matter for tall buildings only. I think it's for every building that is designed, in every environment that is designed. And important to look at disaster resilience, but also very important to look at the microclimate, which is closely related to it, because I think it's not only when there is a big typhoon or when there's big floods or rain, but also the buildings have an effect on when weather is also bad, but slightly worse than a disaster. And I think buildings at this moment of time don't take that in account enough, and especially not tall buildings, which have a huge effect on tunneling wind, on rain and water flow, etc., etc. But I think the main thing they need to do is kind of come up with facades and foundation systems that are much more dynamic and that can respond, and therefore can also change to the conditions.
Respond in what ways?
Respond through capturing, respond to kind of becoming more reflective, or becoming less capturable, or I think it really needs to be able to respond to conditions that influence from the outside.
Are there projects that do that well, or research you're doing or your firm is doing that you think might be promising to?
We look into foundation systems with engineers that kind of are not static anymore, but that can kind of respond, or that are connected to computer systems that, based on the weather conditions, do certain things with buildings. And you see a lot happening on facade already. I think programs like Grasshopper and things make it much more easy for architects, but also facade consultants, to work on topics like that. However, I didn't see any project yet that I think is very successful, or that is not a gimmick rather than a stylish way of solving it.
So a real solution might not necessarily grab a lot of attention on its own.
Preferable not, I would say. I think it would be kind of good if the expression of the architect isn't based on disaster resilience or movement alone, but kind of especially with a design that is specific for the context, that the architect has a possibility to add a technical layer to it, that when there is a disaster, that it can change in such a way that it can resist it.
Can you tell me more about how a structural foundation system like the one you mentioned that could move would actually look and work?
No, you can of course disconnect the piling system or the foundational steel from the building structure itself, and in the middle you could kind of think of systems that respond to the outside pressure of a building, and therefore when the pressure comes from one side, the building can become more stiff on one side than on the other. That's one of the things. That's also a thing that's already kind of used, and especially in areas where the land they built on is in a very weak shape, where there's almost no bedrock available. So you have to go very, very deep with your piling. In these areas, systems like that are already used. But you could also think about making systems like base isolators more dynamic rather than just a physical system.
Another predictive question. Try to imagine your future ideal city. What does it look like?
Not a city that was created out of a tabula rasa, or not created in a context where there is no history or where there are not many layers of culture already or yet. I think what one of the problems of urbanization these days is that it drives the idea that we need to build new cities rather than looking at our current cities and looking at what is unique about them and how we can improve them and densify them. And these new cities are very often kind of completely without any atmosphere or any layer of recognition for its inhabitants. And I think it's a development that should not continue. And obviously urbanization is now a topic that is very important in the Asian region and less important in Europe and in America. But you can envision that areas like Africa, where, for example, Lagos, it is already a big question, but there are many more territories where it could become a question. And South America, where you could expect in certain countries also a push for more urbanization than there was in history, that they don't make the same mistakes that have been made over the last 60 to 70 years. And hopefully they really look at kind of what history is, how cities that are, or settlements that are already there, how they can grow and how they can still talk to the people in the sense of history.
How should cities that haven't yet urbanized to the degree that the places you just mentioned have balance increasing density with preserving architectural heritage?
I think the most important thing is that you should not preserve in the sense of concealing it and just leaving it as it is and maybe restore it. But you really should look at the meaning of the old architecture and the old urbanism and see how you can enhance it based on the current time and the current conditions. So I think it's about rejuvenation rather than about preservation, and it's about how people can understand where the city comes from, rather than that it is important to show one or two unique pieces that relate to history, and the rest can be new. It really has to be about understanding of space, understanding of context, and understanding of how people can use the city.
So many cities want to have the iconic tower for various reasons. Do you think it's a positive trend?
I think almost every city in the world wants to have not only one iconic tower, but as much as they can have.
Yeah.
Because they all want a skyline and they all think that
Right.
that is kind of the race to go for. But I think it makes it very difficult because what does the word iconic mean these days? And kind of every brief OMA receives these days kind of has a question, can you create an icon for us? Even when it's a brief that goes 20 meters high and it's maybe 5,000 square meters. They still want the most important building in the area. That means that everything needs to be special, and because everything is special, nothing is special anymore. So I think the word iconic lost its meaning. Also architects don't associate anymore with it. They will, if necessary, just pay lip service and say what they designed is iconic, and will have a reason why. And clients will simply buy it because everything needs to be iconic. And I think that's a sad situation. And I think that cities should much more look at kind of what they really need and what their people really want, and put that at the center of their agenda for urbanization or for architectural progress. And if they do that, I think there will be unique buildings that are not per se the highest, that are not per se the shiniest, that are not per se the weirdest shape, that are not per se in the most prominent location, that will have meaning that people will understand, not only because the architect said so or because the organization that built it said so, but that they really can interact with. And then these buildings will become timeless. So maybe we need to replace iconic, which is very much related to the last 2 decades, by timeless, and create something that again people can accept for a very long time without that it shouts for too much attention.
I think the Rotterdam might be a good example of that, which won a Tall Building Award this year. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Some floors of the neighboring towers in that project are connected. Is this a trend that OMA is exploring further?
We're definitely looking at the vertical city as a subject, not related to a skyline, but more related to a connection of functionality. It's clear that cities need more density because people move to the city, and many cities have boundaries that cannot expand anymore. But we're trying to do that in a way that it is not only vertical, but that there is also many different possibilities of connection, so that people still have a choice, not only in the horizontal movement, but also in the vertical movement. And the Rotterdam is an experiment of that. It's already a very old experiment because it took a long time to build that building. It has been on hold for over 10 years, in between the design and the construction administration phase. So it is a start of thinking, but you see already in many of our current urban plans, and also in many of our studies for larger building volumes, that we are trying to break up, and that we're trying to create both horizontal and vertical connections.
How far would you take that plan? Could you connect buildings horizontally across a whole urban landscape, or is it just between, a couple neighboring towers when appropriate?
I think that's again very much related to the context. You cannot say you can do that everywhere, or you cannot say you can do it very limited, because it really depends on where the development is, how far you can extend it. I think Hong Kong is a good example where everything is connected, and everybody understands that, and everybody accepts it. But if you look at the people that visit the city, almost nobody understands it, so nobody uses it, and they have a total different perspective of the city than the Hong Kongers. So it's really a cultural issue, how well the street is used, how well the street is conditioned. Traffic plays an important role, climate plays an important role, before you can say how much you can expand it. So I think there will be areas in the world where you can expand that now almost endless, and there are areas in the world where that will never be accepted, and maybe there's just 2 or 3 connections. But I think it should still be explored and at least stretched to the maximum, so that people have a lot of freedom of choice of how to move through the city.
On that note, in China specifically, what do you think traditional cities or traditional urban fabric can teach new vertical cities and the new cities that are developing so rapidly here?
I think one of the issues of the developing cities in China at the moment is that they create typologies that the people that need to live in don't relate to or understand at all. So you create communities that need to firstly shape newly, have much larger numbers than communities in China originally had, and then also kind of they are stacked on top of each other, while people are kind of simply not used to that. So I think one of the key issues is to bring differentiation rather than doing everything in the same way, which is done now. So I'm not per se saying that the vertical extent cannot happen. I think there is no way that you can prevent that, because the numbers of people are so large that you will have to go vertically. Else you will get kind of land masses of cities that are so large that kind of the disconnect horizontally becomes an issue. But you need to shape these towers in such a way that people can still recognize where they live, and not that they are one of 1,000 or one of 3,000. That can be done by experimenting with structure, that can be done by experimenting with the building envelope line, that can be done by looking at facades, that can be maybe also through dialogue with the people that live in these communities and see how far you can stretch uniformity. But I think there needs to be an kind of a way to see how the connection can be made between the people that will live there and the people that are developing it. And you see now already in China that everything, all the developments start to stop. People don't tend to buy as much anymore as they did before. And there's the real quest of what is my identity, and where should I go with that identity. And I think developers will soon enough start looking at that and start addressing it.
Anything else on your mind lately as you survey your post from OMA over Asia?
No, yeah, what we see is that the kind of Asia is such a large territory with so many different cultures, even within countries, that there is still an unbelievable amount of exploration happening, which is, I think, a large opportunity to develop innovation and to push for innovation rather than doing the same everywhere. And I think that has been quite a cliche over the last 20 years, that everything that was successful in one spot should be copied in the other. I think what you see also kind of in the mind of people is that exploration is very vivid and you know, is something they all thrive for, especially the younger people. So that's for architects a possibility to innovate and not only innovate typology but also innovate material technique and urbanization design. So there are many opportunities there. And I think what also is important is that people start looking, instead of only at the city and the architecture in the city, at the countryside and what is, because there are huge changes going on in the countryside, especially in Asia, but also already a little bit in Africa. People that were from the first wave of urbanization went to the cities, made a lot of money in the cities, start longing for also an outside, and they then very often refer back to where their heritage or where they came from, and that's done very often a village or the countryside, but they bring an economic injection to that village, and which transforms that village completely, not only in an architectural sense, but very often also in a social sense. And I think architects also should kind of take the responsibility to not only serve that one client that wants to do that one unique thing, because it's very often a unique thing, but also really look at these communities and see what type of injection would make this community healthy, or would kind of make these communities strong again, in the sense of that they can sustain.
Is that a conversation clients usually are willing to have?
No. We're doing a lot of independent research on that topic at the moment, and what you see is that the private investors that want to kind of make that reconnect with where they came from are very open to that discussion, and very often also open to adding something more than just their brief to the countryside. But I think it's not on the agenda of governments yet. I also think it's not considered sexy to think about the countryside. It's just the city is still by far the place where you can make most success, and therefore politicians are also focused on that success. And I think that is something that will change when people start understanding that the money that is made in the cities at a certain moment will be channeled out, because everybody will get bored. Or nobody can really stand out anymore in these cities, because all people will have more success.
To your point about exporting architecture from one place to another, just copy and pasting it, obviously rural architecture would be so different than the city architecture.
But kind of what you see now is kind of, if something like that happens, there's no research done on that context, there's no research done of what type of injection, there's almost no sustainability questions, while I think these sustainability questions are more relevant in the village than even in the city. And there's very often just a lot of money, and somebody that responds to that money with luxury, not even looking at how that fits in that context. And I think that will become a topic in the coming decades. This is very similar to preservation issues or rejuvenation issues. It only has so long to go before everything is or destroyed or by new development infused in the wrong way.